Day floated in his salvage pod, watching the endless dance of space debris around Nexus Station. The massive orbital platform stretched for kilometers in every direction, its industrial arms reaching out like a metal octopus. He had been working these salvage routes for 3 years now, pulling scrap metal and abandoned cargo from the station's gravity well. It was honest work, but lonely work. The morning shift had been quiet, too quiet. Day sipped his coffee from a magnetic cup and checked his scanner display for the 100th time. Nothing but the usual junk floating in the debris field. Old shipping containers, broken satellite parts, and the occasional piece of hull plating that had broken free from passing ships. Then his scanner lit up like a festival firework. A bright red emergency beacon flashed on his screen, pulsing with urgent intensity. Day nearly choked on his coffee. In 3 years of salvage work, he had never seen a genuine distress signal. His hands moved quickly across the control panel, zooming in on the beacon's location. What he saw made his stomach drop. A sleek diplomatic vessel was tumbling end over end, caught in the station's artificial gravity field. The ship was beautiful, with smooth curves and a metallic finish that seemed to shift colors in the starlight. But it was also clearly damaged. One entire section of the hull had been torn away, and debris was streaming from the wound like blood from an injured animal. Day watched in horror as the ship continued its deadly spiral downward. Below it, the station's massive industrial processors waited like hungry metal mouths. These machines were designed to break down asteroids and space junk, crushing everything into useful materials. If that diplomatic ship reached the processors, there would be nothing left but powder. He grabbed his communication headset and tried to contact the vessel. Static filled his ears. The ship's communication systems must have been damaged in whatever accident had brought it here. Day tried switching to emergency frequencies, but got the same crackling noise. The ship was now less than 2 kilometers from the processors. At its current speed, it would reach them in maybe 10 minutes. Day felt sweat beading on his forehead, despite the cool air in his pod. Diplomatic vessels meant important people. Ambassadors, trade representatives, maybe even royalty from one of the alien governments. His salvage pod was small and fast, built for collecting debris, not for rescue operations. It had basic life support and a small cargo bay, but no medical equipment or proper emergency systems. Still, it was the only ship in range that could reach the diplomatic vessel in time. Day made his decision. He fired up his engines and changed course, pushing his little pod toward the falling ship. His hands shook slightly as he worked the controls. This was way beyond his training or experience. He was a salvage operator, not a rescue pilot, but somebody had to try. As he got closer, he could see more details of the damage. The diplomatic vessel was larger than he had first thought, maybe 3 times the size of his pod. The torn section of hull was jagged and twisted, with sparks still flying from damaged electrical systems. Through the breach, he could see flooded compartments and twisted metal, but there was something else. Movement, a figure struggling inside one of the flooded sections, trying desperately to reach an air pocket. Someone was still alive in there, fighting for their life as the ship fell towards certain destruction. Day gritted his teeth and pushed his engines harder. Day maneuvered his salvage pod alongside the falling diplomatic ship, his heart pounding. So hard he could hear it over the hum of his engines. The vessel was spinning slowly, giving him glimpses into the damaged sections with each rotation. What he saw made his blood run cold. The flooded compartment was filling with a thick, glowing, green liquid that definitely wasn't water. His scanner immediately started beeping warnings. The readout showed chemical signatures that made his stomach turn. Industrial coolant mixed with hydraulic fluid and who knows what other toxic substances. The kind of stuff that could eat through metal, let alone living tissue. And there, in the middle of that deadly soup, was someone fighting for their life. The figure was clearly not human. Even through the swirling green liquid, Day could see that much. The person was taller than any human, with limbs that seemed too long and graceful. But what struck him most was how desperately they were struggling, clawing toward a small air pocket near the ceiling of the compartment. Their movements were becoming weaker with each passing second. Day's safety computer chose that moment to start screaming at him. Warning alerts filled his cockpit with flashing red lights and urgent beeps. His pod's artificial intelligence was running calculations, and didn't like what it found. The diplomatic ship would reach the industrial processes in 7 minutes. The toxic coolant was rated as extremely hazardous to all known life forms. The structural damage to the ship meant any rescue attempt could cause a complete hull collapse. The computer's recommendation was simple and brutal: maintain safe distance and wait for proper rescue teams. But Day knew there weren't any rescue teams coming. Nexus Station's emergency services were designed for industrial accidents, not diplomatic crises. By the time they scrambled a proper rescue ship, both the vessel and its passenger would be nothing but scrap metal in the processes below. He watched the alien figure's struggles growing weaker. They had found the air pocket and were pressing, their face against it, taking desperate breaths. But the green coolant was rising steadily. In a few more minutes, even that small pocket of air would be gone. Day's hands hovered over his controls, trembling slightly. Everything in his training told him to stay back. He was a salvage operator, not a rescue specialist. His pod wasn't equipped for this kind of emergency. One mistake and he would die alongside the alien, leaving 2 bodies instead of 1. But something about the way the alien was fighting refused to let him turn away. There was something so purely desperate about their struggle, so fundamentally alive, that it cut through all his fear and doubt. This wasn't about species or politics or diplomatic protocols. This was about one living being watching another. Living being die and having the power to do something about it. The aliens' movements were getting sluggish now. The toxic coolant was clearly affecting them, poisoning their system even as they fought to keep breathing. Their attempts to reach higher ground were becoming uncoordinated, clumsy. Time was running out fast. Day made his choice. He turned off his safety computer's warnings and locked his pod's docking clamps onto the diplomatic ship's hull. The impact sent shudders through both vessels, but the connection held. His hands moved quickly over the emergency controls, pressurizing his suit and checking his portable life support systems. The readouts weren't encouraging. He had maybe 20 minutes of air, and his suit's protection against chemical hazards was minimal. But 20 minutes would have to be enough. As he prepared to leave his pod, Day caught one more glimpse of the struggling alien through the breach. In the hull. They had stopped moving. Day's radio crackled to life just as he sealed his helmet. The voices of his salvage crew came through in a panic, having finally noticed his position on their tracking systems. "Day, what the hell are you doing?" It was his supervisor, Kim Jun, shouting over the static. "Get away from that ship right now." "There's someone alive in there," Day replied, checking his cutting torch one last time. His voice sounded strange. Inside his helmet, echoing off the faceplate. "Are you insane? That thing's going to hit the processors in 5 minutes. You'll be crushed along with it." More voices joined in, all of them telling him to abort, to get back to safety, to let the proper authorities handle it. But Day could see through the breach in the hull that the alien had stopped moving completely. There weren't going to be any proper authorities. There wasn't going to be time. He switched off his radio. The cutting torch ignited with a bright blue flame, and Day began working on the twisted metal around the breach. The diplomatic ship's hull was made of some kind of advanced alloy that his torch could barely scratch, but the damaged sections were already weakened. Sparks flew as he cut through support beams and hull plating, widening the opening enough for him to squeeze through. The smell hit him first, even through his suit's filters. The toxic coolant had a sharp chemical stench that made his eyes water. His suit's sensors were going crazy, detecting dozens of hazardous compounds in the green liquid that now filled most of the compartment. Day lowered himself through the opening and immediately felt the coolant seeping through his boots. The liquid was thicker than water, almost syrupy, and it clung to everything it touched. Within seconds, he could see tiny wisps of smoke rising from where it contacted his suit's outer layer. The stuff was literally eating through his protection. The alien was floating face down in the middle of the compartment, completely still. Now that he was closer, Day could see more details. She was definitely female, with features that were elegant and sharp at the same time. Her skin had a pale, almost translucent quality, and her hair floated around her head like silver silk. She wore what looked like formal robes, now torn and stained by the toxic coolant. But what struck Day most was how refined she looked, even unconscious and dying. Everything about her spoke of high status and careful breeding. The cut of her clothes, the jewelry still clinging to her wrists, even the way she held herself in the water, suggested someone important. Someone who had probably never experienced anything like this in her entire life. Day waded through the rising coolant, feeling it burn through his gloves as he reached for her. The liquid was up to his chest now, and every step was a struggle. His suit's integrity warnings were constant, telling him that his protection was failing fast. He had maybe 10 minutes before the coolant ate through to his skin. When he grabbed the alien woman's arm, she didn't respond at all. Her body was limp, lifeless. For a terrible moment, Day thought he was too late, but then he felt her chest move slightly against his arm. She was still breathing, barely. The air pocket she had been trying to reach was almost gone now. Just a tiny bubble near the ceiling. The entire compartment would be flooded in minutes. Day looked around desperately, trying to find another way out, another source of air. But there was nothing. The only exit was the way he had come in, and that was already underwater. His suit's emergency beacon started beeping. 4 minutes until the ship hit the processors. The countdown had begun. Day's mind raced as he held the unconscious alien woman against his chest. The toxic coolant was now up to his neck, and his suit was falling apart around him. But then he remembered something from his emergency training, something about creating temporary air bubbles in flooded spaces. His suit had an emergency inflation system designed for spacewalks gone wrong. It could release compressed air to help stabilize a damaged suit. Day had never used it in a situation like this, but desperate times called for desperate measures. He activated the system and felt his suit's outer layer begin to expand like a balloon. The air created a bubble around both him and the alien woman, pushing back the deadly green liquid. It wasn't much, maybe enough air for a few minutes, but it gave them a chance. The alien woman stirred in his arms, coughing up coolant and gasping for breath. Her eyes opened, revealing irises that shifted color like oil on water. She looked at Day with confusion and fear, clearly not understanding what was happening or who he was. "Easy," Day said, though he doubted she could understand him. "I'm here to help." She tried to speak but only managed to cough up more of the toxic liquid. Her elegant features were twisted with pain, and Day could see that the coolant had burned her skin wherever it had touched. She was in bad shape, but she was alive. The ship gave a violent shudder, and Day heard the groan of metal under stress. They were running out of time. His suit's computer informed him that they had less than 3 minutes before impact with the processors. The temporary air bubble was already shrinking as his suit's emergency system ran out of compressed air. Tume looked around the flooded compartment, trying to find a way out. The opening he had cut was now completely submerged, but there had to be another way. Diplomatic ships were built with multiple escape routes. There had to be emergency hatches, service tunnels, something. Then he spotted it, a maintenance shaft in the ceiling, barely visible through the swirling coolant. It was small, maybe just big enough for one person to crawl through, but it led upward, towards sections of the ship that might still have air. The problem was getting there. The shaft was 3 meters above them, and Day's suit was too heavy to swim that far while carrying the alien woman. His equipment was designed for zero gravity, not for swimming through toxic soup. But his suit wasn't the only thing weighing him down. Day made a quick decision and started stripping off his suit's outer armor plating. The protective panels were meant to shield him from debris and radiation, but right now they were just dead weight. He let the heavy pieces sink into the green liquid, feeling himself become more buoyant with each discarded plate. His suit's warnings became more urgent as he removed its protection. The coolant immediately began eating through the thinner inner layer, but Day ignored the burning sensation. He wrapped his arms around the alien woman and kicked toward the ceiling. The maintenance shaft was even smaller than it had looked from below. Day had to push the alien woman through first, then squeeze in after her. The shaft was barely wide enough for his shoulders, and every movement was a struggle. Behind them, he could hear the compartment's hull beginning to buckle under the pressure. They crawled through darkness, following the shaft as it angled upward through the ship's superstructure. Day's suit lights flickered and died, leaving them with only the faint glow from his helmet's emergency illumination. His air supply gauge showed red. His heating system had failed, and the cold was starting to seep through his damaged suit. But they were moving up, away from the flooded sections. And somewhere ahead, Day could see a faint light. The light at the end of the maintenance shaft turned out to be an emergency beacon. Day and the alien woman tumbled out of the narrow tunnel into what looked like the ship's upper cargo bay. The air here was thin but breathable, and most importantly, it wasn't filled with toxic coolant. Day's suit was in complete failure mode now. His heating system was dead, his air recycling was barely working, and the outer shell looked like it had been attacked by acid. Which he supposed it had been. But they were alive, and that was what mattered. The alien woman was unconscious again, her breathing shallow and rapid. The coolant had done serious damage to her system, and Day knew she needed medical attention. Fast, he activated his emergency beacon and waited, hoping his salvage crew had been monitoring his position. It took 20 minutes for the rescue ship to arrive. 20 minutes of Day sitting in the cold, damaged cargo bay, watching the alien woman's breathing, and wondering if she would survive. When he finally heard the sound of docking clamps connecting to the hull, he nearly cried with relief. The medical team that came aboard was professional and efficient. They had brought a portable life support unit designed for alien physiology, something Day had never seen before. Within minutes, they had the woman stabilized and were preparing to transport her to Nexus Station's medical facility. 3 days later, Day stood outside the medical bay, still trying to process what had happened. His superiors had given him a week of paid leave after his reckless but heroic actions, as they put it. The story had already spread through the station's gossip networks. The salvage operator who dove into a toxic hell to save a drowning alien had become something of a local celebrity. But Day didn't feel like a hero. He felt tired and confused and strangely empty. He had acted on instinct, without thinking about consequences or glory. Now that it was over, he wondered what would happen next. The medical bay doors opened and a doctor emerged. She was human, one of the few xenobiologists stationed on Nexus. Her expression was serious as she approached Day. "She's awake," the doctor said, "and she's asking for you." Day followed her through the sterile corridors of the medical facility. The alien woman was in a specialized treatment room, surrounded by monitoring equipment that beeped and hummed softly. She looked much better than she had in the flooded compartment, but Day could still see the marks where the coolant had burned her pale skin. When she saw him, her color-shifting eyes focused with startling intensity. She studied his face for a long moment, as if trying to memorize every detail. Then she spoke, and Dee was surprised to hear perfect, unaccented English. "You are the one who saved me," she said. It wasn't a question. "I'm Day," he replied, feeling awkward. "Kang Day, I'm glad you're okay." She tilted her head slightly, and Day noticed that her features had an almost crystalline quality, as if her bones were made of some kind of translucent material. Everything about her seemed too perfect, too refined for someone who had nearly died in a pool of industrial coolant. "I am Princess Hana of the Veiled Dominion," she said, and her voice carried an authority that made Day straighten unconsciously. "Third heir to the Crystal Throne, daughter of the Eternal Regent, keeper of the sacred codes." Day blinked. He had heard of the Veiled Dominion, of course. Everyone in civilized space had. They were one of the oldest and most powerful alien civilizations, known for their advanced technology and extreme selectiveness about who they dealt with. They considered most other species to be primitive and unworthy of their attention, including humans. Princess Hana sat up in her medical bed, ignoring the protests from the monitoring equipment. Her crystalline features caught the light in ways that seemed almost impossible, creating tiny rainbows across her pale skin. Day found himself staring, then quickly looked away, embarrassed. "Do you understand what you have done, Kang Day?" she asked, her voice carrying that same regal authority that made him feel like he should bow or something. Day shrugged, uncomfortable with the attention. "I saw someone drowning. I helped. That's what people do." Princess Hana's expression changed, and for a moment she looked almost sad. "No," she said quietly, "that is what humans do. My people would have calculated the risks, analyzed the probabilities, and decided that one life was not worth the danger. We would have watched me die and called it logical." The medical equipment beeped softly in the silence that followed. Day didn't know what to say to that. The idea that an entire civilization would just watch someone drown because it was too risky to help seemed impossible to him. But then again, he didn't know much about alien cultures. For 300 years, my people have observed humanity, Princess Hana continued. We have watched your species spread across the galaxy, making allies, starting conflicts, building and destroying with equal enthusiasm. Our analysts concluded that humans were too emotional, too impulsive, too willing to act without thinking. We classified you as a developing species that might in time learn wisdom. She paused, studying Day's face again with those strange, shifting eyes. But what you did changes everything. You risked your life for a stranger, for someone whose species has shown you nothing but cold indifference. You acted without hope of reward, without even knowing who I was. That kind of selfless courage is something my people have forgotten how to understand. Day felt heat rising in his cheeks. I'm not special. Any human would have done the same thing. Yes, Princess Hana said, and now she was smiling. That is exactly what makes you special. She reached over to a small device on her bedside table, something that looked like a crystal sphere filled with swirling light. When she touched it, holographic symbols appeared in the air above it, writing themselves in patterns that hurt Day's eyes to look at directly. I'm invoking an ancient law of my people, she said, her voice taking on a formal, ceremonial tone. The right of sacred debt. When a life is saved through pure selflessness, the debt can only be repaid through the greatest gift we can offer. The holographic symbols pulsed brighter, and Day heard a faint humming sound like distant music. Kang. Day of Earth, I offer you the enhancement ritual of the Veiled Dominion. This sacred process will extend your natural lifespan by centuries and grant you abilities that will serve you well in the years to come. Your mind will be sharpened, your body strengthened, your senses expanded beyond normal human limits. Day's mouth fell open. He had heard rumors about the Dominion's enhancement technology, whispered stories about aliens who lived for thousands of years and could accomplish impossible feats. But no one outside their species had ever been offered such a thing. Wait, he said, his voice cracking slightly. You're serious? You want to give me alien superpowers? Princess Hana laughed, a sound like crystal bells chiming. That is a very human way to put it, but yes. No member of your species has ever received this honor. My council will be furious. Some may call it treason, but the debt must be paid, and this is the only gift worthy of what you have given me. The holographic symbols were spinning faster now, and Day could feel something in the air around them, like the moment before a thunderstorm. There is one condition, Princess Hana said, her expression becoming serious again. Once the enhancement is complete, you can never return to being merely human. The changes are permanent and irreversible. You will live for centuries while your friends and family age and die. You will see the rise and fall of civilizations. This gift comes with a price that few are prepared to pay. The news of Princess Hana's offer spread through the galaxy faster than light-speed communications could carry it. Within hours of her announcement, the Veiled Dominion's High Council had convened an emergency session. The crystalline chamber where they met hadn't seen such chaos in over 2 centuries. Elder Christarch Veltar, oldest member of the council, stood at the center of the storm. His ancient form flickered with angry light as he addressed the assembled nobles. This is madness. His voice resonated through the crystal walls. The enhancement ritual is sacred to our people. It has never been offered to an outsider, let alone a human. Other council members joined the outcry. They spoke of tradition, of the purity of their bloodlines, of the dangerous precedent this would set. Some called Princess Hana's decision reckless. Others whispered of treason, but the princess herself remained calm in the face of their anger. She had returned to the Dominion's capital ship as soon as the medical team cleared her for travel, bringing Day with her. Now she stood before the council, her crystalline features set in determination. The sacred debt must be honored, she said, her voice cutting through the chaos. Our own laws require it. This human risked everything to save my life, expecting nothing in return. How can we do less than offer our greatest gift, Meanwhile, in the diplomatic quarters of stations across the galaxy, other alien governments were taking notice. The news that the Dominion had offered their sacred enhancement to a human sent shockwaves through interstellar politics. In the trade centers of the Merchant Coalition, business leaders gathered in urgent meetings. If the Dominion saw value in humans, maybe it was time to reconsider their own trade restrictions with Earth. Human markets had been growing steadily, but most alien businesses had ignored them as too primitive to be worth the effort. The military commanders of the Stellar Defense Alliance were having similar discussions. Human ships had proven surprisingly effective in recent conflicts, showing a creativity and unpredictability that caught their enemies off guard. But the Alliance had always kept Earth's forces at arm's length, considering them too wild and undisciplined for serious military cooperation. Now they were wondering if they had been wrong. On Earth itself, the news created its own kind of chaos. Day's story had been picked up by news networks across human space, turning a simple salvage operator into the most famous person on the planet. Government officials who had never heard his name a week ago were now scrambling to contact him, offering everything from medals to movie deals. But the real impact was in the reactions of ordinary humans. In bars and coffee shops, in schools and workplaces, people were talking about what Dai had done, not because it was extraordinary, but because it was so completely ordinary. Everyone seemed to know someone who would have done the same thing. Back on the Dominion capital ship, Elder Veltar was making one final attempt to change Princess Hana's mind. "Think of what this means," he pleaded. "If we enhance this human, others will follow. Earth's governments will demand the same treatment for their own people. We will be forced to share our most precious secrets with a species that has barely learned to leave their own solar system." Princess Hana considered this for a moment. "Perhaps," she said finally, "that is exactly what needs to happen." The council chamber fell silent. Even the angry flickering of the crystal walls seemed to dim. "For too long we have isolated ourselves," the princess continued. "We have watched other species from a distance, judging them unworthy of our attention. But this human showed me something we have forgotten. Sometimes the greatest wisdom is not in calculating risks, but in acting with an open heart." Elder Veltar's crystalline form seemed to droop with defeat. "And if you are wrong, if this human proves unworthy of our gift," Princess Hana smiled, "then we will have learned something valuable about the nature of worthiness itself." Day stood in the center of the enhancement chamber, trying not to let his nervousness show. The room was unlike anything he had ever seen, with walls made of living crystal that pulsed with soft, rhythmic light. Strange symbols floated in the air around him, shifting and changing like they were alive. Princess Hana watched from an observation platform above, her expression unreadable. The political storm her decision had created was still raging throughout the Dominion, but she had made her choice. The ritual would proceed, regardless of what the High Council thought. "Are you certain about this?" she asked, her voice echoing in the crystalline chamber. "Once we begin, there is no going back. You will be changed forever." Day nodded, though his hands were shaking slightly. "I understand. I've thought about it a lot these past few days. If this can help humans and aliens understand each other, better, then it's worth it." The truth was, he had been terrified when he first learned what the enhancement would involve. The Dominion's technology wasn't like human science, which worked with machines and computers. Their biotechnology was organic, alive, and it would become part of him at the most fundamental level. But he had also seen the way other species looked at humans. The dismissive glances, the condescending attitudes, the assumption that Earth's people were too primitive to matter. If accepting this gift could change that, if it could open doors for his entire species, then his personal fears didn't matter. The ritual began with a sound like singing crystal. The chamber filled with a warm golden light that seemed to come from everywhere at once. Day felt something settle over his skin, like a gentle breeze made of starlight. It didn't hurt, but he could sense that something profound was happening to his body. The enhancement worked at the cellular level, Princess Hana had explained. It would strengthen his immune system, repair genetic damage, and optimize his physical capabilities. But more than that, it would create new neural pathways in his brain. expanding his capacity for learning and understanding. Day closed his eyes and let the transformation wash over him. He could feel his heartbeat slowing, becoming stronger and more regular. His breathing deepened, and suddenly he could taste the air in ways he never had before. Every molecule seemed to carry information about the chamber, the ship, even the empty space beyond the hull. The mental changes were even more dramatic. It was like someone had turned up the brightness on his thoughts. Ideas that had been fuzzy before became crystal clear. Patterns he had never noticed jumped out at him. He could feel his memory expanding, becoming more precise and detailed. But the most surprising change was emotional. Day had always been a fairly empathetic person, but now he could sense the feelings of everyone around him. Princess Hana's mixture of hope and anxiety, the anger and fear of the council members watching from hidden chambers, even the complex emotions of the biotechnology itself, which seemed to be genuinely curious about its new human host. The transformation lasted 3 hours, though it felt like both minutes and days to Day. When the golden light finally faded, he opened his eyes and found himself looking at the world in ways he had never imagined possible. The crystal walls weren't just walls anymore. He could see the living networks of energy that flowed through them, the way they processed information and responded to the presence of different life forms. The floating symbols that had seemed random before now made perfect sense. They were a language, but not one made of words. They were pure meaning, flowing directly from mind to mind. "How do you feel?" Princess Hana asked, her voice carrying undertones of concern and excitement. Dai smiled, and he could feel that even his smile was different now, more controlled and purposeful. "Like I'm seeing the universe for the first time," he said. "Like I was blind before, and now I can see." 6 months after his transformation, Day stood in the main conference hall of the Galactic Trade Consortium, watching delegates from dozens of alien species take their seats. The massive chamber buzzed with the sounds of universal translators working overtime, converting hundreds of different languages into something approaching mutual understanding. But Dai didn't need the translators anymore. The enhancement had given him the ability to understand the underlying meaning behind words, to read the emotional subtext in every gesture and tone. He could see that the Zephyrian ambassador was nervous about the new trade proposals, that the Crystalline Federation's representative was genuinely excited about working with humans, and that at least 3 different species were still skeptical about Earth's rapid rise in galactic politics. It was a far cry from his old life as a salvage operator. These days, Day spent his time traveling between worlds, serving as humanity's first enhanced ambassador. The title felt strange to him, but he had grown into the role. His unique perspective, part human intuition and part Dominion enhancement, had made him surprisingly effective at bridging gaps between species that had been suspicious of each other for centuries. The meeting began with the usual diplomatic pleasantries, but Day could sense the undercurrent of real excitement in the room. Today's agenda included the formal announcement of the Human Integration Initiative, a galaxy-spanning program that would bring Earth's colonies into full membership in the major interstellar organizations. It had all started with Princess Hana's decision to honor the sacred debt. Once the Dominion had enhanced a human, other species began to reconsider their assumptions about Earth's people. The Merchant Coalition had been the first to reach out, offering trade agreements that would have been unthinkable just a year ago. The Stellar Defense Alliance had followed, inviting human ships to participate in joint military exercises. But the real breakthrough had come when Day helped resolve a territorial dispute between the aquatic realm and the Desert Confederation. The 2 species had been on the brink of war over mineral rights to a contested star system. Their fundamental differences in biology and culture had made communication nearly impossible. Aquatic realm delegates literally couldn't survive in the same atmosphere as their desert-dwelling counterparts. Day had spent weeks shuttling between their respective ships, using his enhanced abilities to translate not just languages but entire ways of thinking. He helped the aquatic species understand the desert dwellers' deep cultural connection to dry, rocky worlds. He showed the Desert Confederation how the aquatic realm's need for water-rich planets was about survival, not greed. This Solution he proposed was simple but revolutionary. Instead of fighting over the contested system, why not share it? The desert species could mine the rocky inner planets, while the aquatic realm developed the outer worlds with their abundant water resources. Both species would benefit, and the precedent of cooperation would be set for future disputes. The success of that mediation had cemented Day's reputation as someone who could make the impossible happen. Requests for his help started pouring in from across the galaxy. Species that had been enemies for generations were suddenly willing to sit down and talk, as long as the enhanced human was there to facilitate. Now, as he listened to the trade, Consortium's president formally welcomed Earth as a full member organization. Day reflected on how far things had come. The scared salvage operator, who had jumped into toxic coolant to save a drowning stranger, was gone. In his place was someone who could speak for his entire species on the galactic stage. But at his core, he was still the same person. Still someone who believed that when another being was in trouble, you helped them regardless of the risks or complications. That simple human instinct, enhanced and refined by Dominion technology, had become the foundation for a new era of interstellar cooperation. The universe was changing, and humanity was finally taking its place among the stars. Retry Claude can make mistakes. Please double-check responses.